The police dog, no one wanted, was hiding something unbelievable. There was something strange about the way the dog moved. Carefully, silently, like it had been trained not just to survive, but to serve. Even half-starved and trembling, its eyes scanned the shadows like a soldier waiting for orders. And yet, no one had claimed him, until Aiden did. A simple act wrapping the dog in his coat and whispering, "You're safe now," unleashed a story that would shatter everything he thought he knew. Because this German Shepherd had once been someone's partner, someone who vanished. And the dog, he was never meant to survive. But he did. And he remembered every order, every scar, every name, including one he refused to obey. Colt Mercer, a man who would stop at nothing to get him back, for all the wrong reasons. The wind had a bite to it that night. It slithered through the chain-link fences of Hope Trail Animal Rescue like a warning, cold and sharp and personal. Aiden drew his coat tighter around himself, one hand stuffed in his pocket, the other gripping the keys he'd just used to lock the front gate. The padlock clicked, echoing louder than it should have in the stillness. It was well past 11 p.m. Everyone else had gone home hours ago, volunteers, techs, even the vet had left early. Only Aiden remained, as he often did, claiming he needed to finish paperwork or check supplies. Truth was, he didn't like going home. Home was too quiet. And sometimes, when the world got too still, the ghosts came back. His boots crunched over gravel as he moved toward the lot. A light dusting of snow had started to fall, dust swirling under the glow of a lone parking lamp. His breath rose in soft white clouds. He passed the main kennels and gave a glance at the darkened windows. No more barking, no scratching at the walls. The dogs had long since quieted. They always knew when the night was ending. Aiden paused to rub the back of his neck. The dull ache had returned, the one that ran from his shoulder blade to the base of his skull. It always flared when he was tired or tense, or remembering. Tonight, it was all three. He reached his truck and fumbled for the key fob. That's when he heard it. A sound. So faint he thought he imagined it at first. He froze. For a moment the world held its breath. Even the wind paused. Then it came again, barely audible, a whimper, weak, fragile, carried on the breeze like a thread unspooling in the dark. Aiden turned. His body shifted before his mind could catch up. Years of training, of instincts honed on the battlefield, still lived in the marrow of his bones. He scanned the shadows behind the kennels. Nothing moved. But the sound had been real. He stepped off the gravel path, boots crunching into the frozen dirt as he headed toward the back of the building. The light from his phone cast an uneven glow ahead of him, catching flakes of snow in the air like drifting ash. The shelter's rear perimeter was less maintained, just a chain-link fence, a line of dying trees, an old concrete foundation. Another whimper, closer this time. "Hello?" he called softly, uncertain why he whispered. No answer. Just the low moan of wind against metal siding. Then his light caught something. Movement. A shadow within the shadows. Aiden's breath hitched. Near the rusted remains of an old irrigation pipe, something huddled against the post. At first he thought it was a pile of debris, but then it trembled. Aiden crouched. The form solidified under the glow of his flashlight. A dog. Large. Shaggy in places, but patchy in others. Like fur had fallen out from malnutrition or stress. The animal's body shook uncontrollably, legs tucked tight, tail curled protectively. A heavy rope was tied around its midsection and looped to the pipe. Snow had begun to gather on its back. Aiden moved in slowly. "Hey there." His voice was low, non-threatening. It didn't matter. The dog didn't lift its head. Only when Aiden got close enough did the dog look up, and in that moment something passed between them, quick, electric, and inexplicable. Eyes. That was all Aiden remembered later. Dull from exhaustion, hollow from fear, but deep, endless. And behind them, a flicker, not of defiance, not even hope, but life. He knelt just outside reach. "Who left you out here?" he whispered. The dog didn't answer, of course, but it didn't bark, didn't growl. It only watched him. Aiden moved his light downward and spotted something metallic hanging from the animal's collar, an old scratched K9 badge. The engraving was worn, but one word still caught the light. Orion. A name? A designation? It didn't matter. "Jesus," Aiden muttered, his breath fogging as it left him. The cold pierced through his jeans, biting at his knees. "You're a working dog. Or used to be. And someone had left him here to die." For a moment Aiden sat back on his heels, mind racing. The rules were clear. Any stray, especially aggressive or possibly dangerous, had to be processed, quarantined. In cases like this, wounded, traumatized, they were often euthanized. Less cost, less risk. He looked at the rope again. The dog wasn't trying to escape, wasn't even resisting. He was waiting. And that broke something in Aiden's chest. He pulled off his outer coat and stepped forward, unwrapping the rope from the pipe. The dog didn't fight. He didn't flinch. He just watched. "I'm not supposed to do this," Aiden whispered, wrapping the coat around the shivering body. "But neither are you. You're not supposed to be here, like this." The dog gave a sound of breath, not quite a whine, but close. "You're coming home with me tonight, Orion, or whatever your name is." The dog let himself be lifted. He was lighter than expected, too light. As Aiden carried him toward the truck, snow falling around them like fragments of silence, he didn't yet know how this decision would change everything, only that it already had. The light from Aiden's phone stuttered over gravel, catching on patches of frost and the jagged edge of a busted-down fence post. His breath came in shallow clouds, the cold biting deeper now that he was off the path, moving behind the main building where the wind funneled tighter, sharper. The sound came again. A whimper, small, fractured, like it had already given up halfway through. He swept his light along the back wall. Trash bins. An old utility hose coiled and frozen stiff. Shadows sprawled from the base of the building like fingers. And then, something wrong. A shape too still, a shadow within shadows. Aiden took one cautious step forward, then another, and the shape moved. The beam of his flashlight hit fur, matted, dirty, some spots clumped with ice, others missing altogether. What he saw next stopped him cold. Tethered to the base of a rusting steel pipe was a German shepherd, or what used to be one. The dog's body was crumpled in on itself, all sharp angles and hollow curves, ribs pushing hard against thin skin. One of its legs was tucked awkwardly under its frame, the other three barely held him upright. His chest heaved, but silently, like even breathing had to be rationed. Aiden crouched, but didn't move closer. The dog looked up. Their eyes met, and for a moment the night paused, like the universe leaned in. The dog's eyes were dulled, sunken but not empty. Somewhere behind the glazed fatigue was the faintest echo of alertness, not curiosity, not even fear, readiness, like he was waiting for the next bad thing, or the end. Aiden lowered his light slightly, trying not to blind him. "Hey there, buddy." His voice cracked under the weight of something he hadn't felt in a while. "What the hell happened to you?" The dog didn't answer. But he didn't growl either, didn't flinch, just watched. Aiden could see now one ear was torn, jagged like it had been ripped and left to heal without care. The fur around his chest was patchy, discolored. A welt circled his upper torso, a fresh mark, tight and raw. Whoever tied him here hadn't done it with the intention of letting him go. Then the light caught something metallic near the dog's throat. Aiden leaned in. It was a tag. Not a typical collar tag, but a small, weather-worn plate, the kind that used to be issued to working dogs, military, police, or private canine units. The engraving was nearly worn smooth, but the letters were still legible under the grime. Canine Orion. Aiden blinked. A name? A designation? A past. He exhaled slowly, his breath fogging between them. "Orion," he repeated under his breath. The name didn't fit the shattered creature in front of him. Not yet. It sounded strong, celestial, like something meant to guide, not crawl in the dirt waiting to die. His eyes dropped to the rope again. It was coarse and stained, tied so tight it pinched into the fur. The knot was crude but deliberate. Someone hadn't just abandoned this dog. They had dumped a soldier and walked away. The old anger flared hot and too familiar. Aiden had felt it before, staring at body bags that never should have zipped shut, at medals handed to families like they meant something, at broken systems that discarded the very ones who served them. His fingers itched to untie the rope. But he waited. One wrong move, and Orion might bolt, or worse. "You've been trained, haven't you?" he said softly. "But not for kindness." The wind cut around the corner, and the dog shivered violently, like his bones were too cold to hold him up much longer. Still, he didn't make a sound. Aiden shifted, one knee to the ground now, and reached slowly, deliberately toward the knot. The dog didn't bite, didn't resist, just watched, frozen in every sense. The rope came loose with a tug. Orion didn't move. Aiden peeled off his outer jacket and gently wrapped it around the trembling frame. He expected some kind of reaction fear, tension, a flinch. Instead, the dog let out a breath. Not relief exactly, but something quieter, something like surrender. "I can't leave you here," Aiden whispered, his throat tightening. "Protocol be damned." Carefully he slid one arm under the dog's front legs, the other beneath his hindquarters. He braced for a struggle, but Orion went limp, hollow, too light, like half of him was already gone. Aiden stood, cradling him close, coat bundled around them both. He turned back toward the parking lot, snow swirling now in thin crystalline spirals. The wind whispered through chain link, and in the distance a door creaked open and slammed shut again in protest. He adjusted his grip as they walked, every step crunching into the frost-bitten gravel. "Let's get you warm," he said. "We'll figure the rest out later." Behind them, the rusting pipe stood silent, its job done, its cruelty complete. But in Aiden's arms, something shifted. The dog turned his head slightly, and for the first time that night, he closed his eyes. The warmth inside the truck was weak at best. An old heater groaning against the cold, doing what it could in the dying light of the dashboard. Aiden sat behind the wheel, unmoving. His hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white not from the temperature, but from the weight of the decision settling in his chest. The German shepherd lay curled in the passenger seat, bundled in Aiden's coat, like a child hidden beneath two thin blankets. The dog's eyes were half closed now, his breath shallow but steady. Every few minutes, a tremor rippled through his body like a distant aftershock. Aiden knew what he should have done. He should have called it in, registered the stray, logged the incident, filed the paperwork, sent the dog to intake for medical evaluation. But he also knew how that would have ended. A dog in this condition, emaciated, possibly aggressive, bearing the physical history of trauma and God knows what kind of training, wouldn't make it through the system, not unless a miracle stepped in. And Aiden didn't believe in miracles, only moments. And sometimes, if you caught one fast enough, it could change everything. He looked over at the shepherd. The name tag still clung to the collar, glinting faintly under the dashboard light. K9, Orion. But Orion didn't fit the being in front of him. That name belonged to something proud, something sharp and bright and celestial. This creature wasn't any of those things. Not anymore. Still, something about him held. Despite the wounds, the scars, the bone-thin fragility, he hadn't lashed out. He hadn't snapped. Even when Aiden had freed him, lifted him, touched skin where the fur no longer grew, he hadn't growled, hadn't bared teeth. He had just endured. There was fear in those eyes, but not wild, not rabid. It was the fear of something that used to trust, that had been burned for it, that still hoped it wouldn't happen again, even when experience said otherwise. Aiden turned the key. The engine rumbled. Headlights cut into the snowy night. He pulled out of the lot without looking back. By the time he reached the apartment, the streets were nearly empty. Most storefronts were closed. The world felt paused, held in that strange hush that only winter could bring. He parked 2 blocks away just in case. Carrying the dog up the narrow flight of stairs to his second-floor unit was harder than it should have been. Not because of the weight, but because of what it meant. Every step echoed like a choice being carved in stone. He unlocked the door with a quiet breath and nudged it open with his shoulder. The apartment was small, barely furnished, the kind of place you don't decorate because you're not sure how long you'll stay. But it was warm, safe. He lowered the dog gently onto a folded blanket near the radiator. The shepherd didn't resist, didn't even lift his head. But his eyes tracked Aiden's movement as he stepped away. Watchful, tired, never blinking. Aiden moved to the kitchen. He opened the one low cabinet where he still kept a bag of old supplies leftovers from the last time he'd fostered a senior lab mix. He found a dented can of soft food, still good, filled a bowl with warm tap water. Then he returned and set both down a few feet from the blanket. The shepherd didn't move. "That's all right," Aiden said softly, crouching at a distance. "Take your time." The radiator hissed behind him, the only sound in the room besides the dog's shallow breaths. Aiden sat with his back to the couch. He leaned his head back and stared at the ceiling. His legs stretched out, his muscles heavy with the fatigue that came after adrenaline faded. He didn't speak for a long while. He didn't need to, but eventually he turned his head and looked over again. The dog hadn't touched the food or water, but his eyes, they were still on Aiden, that same stare, not demanding, not pleading, just present. "I don't know what they called you before," Aiden said, "or what they made you do." He paused, exhaling through his nose. "But they don't get to name you anymore." The words felt bigger than the room, like they hung in the air, waiting. Aiden looked at the dog, truly looked. The shredded ear, the scars beneath the fur, the silence that came not from instinct but discipline, the kind that had been beaten into him. "You're not Orion," he whispered. He thought about it. Let the quiet shape something new. "Shadow," he murmured, testing the word. The shepherd blinked. "It fits," Aiden said, voice barely above a breath. "You've seen too much, stayed too long in places no one should, but you're still here." Shadow didn't move, but he didn't look away either. It was enough. Aiden leaned back again, resting his arms behind his head. The ceiling fan spun slowly, casting a dim, rotating shadow across the far wall. Tomorrow, the questions would come. The risk, the lies. He'd broken protocol. But tonight, none of that mattered, because a dog named Shadow was still breathing. And sometimes, survival was enough to start over. The apartment was dark, except for the soft, amber glow of a single lamp on the kitchen counter. Outside, snow tapped gently against the windows like fingers too tired to knock. The radiator hissed quietly in the corner, its metallic breath offering the only real warmth in the room. Shadow hadn't moved since Aiden set him down. He was still curled up on the folded blanket, his body tight against the wall just beside the heater, eyes half-lidded but wide awake beneath the surface. Every so often his ears would twitch toward a new sound. Pipes groaning in the walls, footsteps in the hallway, the creak of Aiden's floorboards as he moved from room to room. He didn't eat, he didn't sleep, but he didn't run. That mattered more than it seemed. Aiden sat cross-legged across the room, a small plate of scrambled eggs going cold in his lap. He hadn't had the appetite to finish them. He'd turned off the TV after 10 minutes, unable to focus. Even his phone sat untouched, no doom scrolling, no texts to reply to. He just watched Shadow, quietly, gently, giving him the one thing no one else had: space. The shepherd's breathing was slow, uneven. His chest rose like it wasn't sure it should. One leg twitched slightly, whether from cold or memory, Aiden couldn't tell. The food and water bowl remained untouched. "Hey," Aiden said softly, not moving. "I know you probably think this is just another stop, that someone else is going to come get you, or hurt you." Shadow didn't react. "I don't blame you." The words drifted into the air like steam, vanishing before they could reach him. Aiden looked at the coat still wrapped around the dog. His own coat, the one with the stitched military patch on the inside lining. Funny how something meant for protection fabric, patches, names, didn't protect you from the kind of cold that lived inside. He leaned his head back against the couch. The silence of the apartment wrapped around him like a familiar ache. He hadn't shared this space with anyone in months, maybe longer. There'd been a stretch of time where he even preferred it that way. Until now. The truth hit him quietly, like most truths do. He needed this silence to mean something. Aiden glanced at the bottle of sleep meds on the counter and ignored it. He wasn't going to numb this moment, not tonight. "I've seen that look before," he said after a while, eyes locked on Shadow. "In the mirror. After I got out. After I stopped pretending nothing got in." The dog shifted slightly, the movement barely there. "You don't have to trust me. Not yet. Hell, maybe not ever. But I'm not going to throw you away like they did." Aiden's voice cracked on the last word, so he stopped talking. Sometimes the silence did more than comfort. It let pain settle into words before they escaped. The hours stretched long. At some point, Aiden moved to lie on the couch, not even bothering with a blanket. Just boots off, arms crossed behind his head, gaze on the ceiling fan as it spun a lazy, silent orbit. At 2:43 a.m., Shadow moved. Not much, just enough to shift his weight and press his shoulder tighter to the baseboard heater. His tail flicked once, no sound, just the soft brush of fur against tile. Aiden didn't lift his head, but he saw it, and he smiled, just a little. When dawn came, it arrived quietly. Light crept through the half-closed blinds like an apology, gentle, golden, hesitant to disrupt the stillness. Aiden stirred on the couch, his neck aching, his back stiff, the kind of sleep that wasn't rest, just suspension. He sat up slowly and looked across the room. Shadow hadn't run. He was still there, still tucked tight against the radiator, but now his head was resting on the coat like a makeshift pillow. His eyes were closed, not deep sleep, but something just shy of it. Aiden let out a long, steady breath. He didn't say anything, didn't try to move closer, didn't push food or pet him or whisper empty reassurances. Instead, he stood quietly, moved to the kitchen, and turned on the kettle. As water bubbled, Aiden leaned against the counter, watching the steam rise. Shadow cracked one eye open at the sound. His ears tilted slightly toward it, but he didn't lift his head. He didn't retreat. Another step forward, small, but unmistakable. Aiden poured his coffee and returned to the couch. Sat. Waited. After a moment, he said softly, "I don't know what they taught you to be afraid of, but you're safe now, Shadow." Across the room, the dog's tail gave a twitch. Not a wag, not yet, but not fear. And that was the beginning. The second night passed with little change. The apartment was quieter than usual, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Aiden didn't turn on the TV. He barely touched his phone. Every sound felt intrusive, too sharp, too sudden. So instead, he moved with intention. Deliberate, soft, like he was sharing the space with something sacred or broken. Shadow still hadn't touched the food. The water bowl remained full. Every few hours, Aiden refilled it with fresh, warm water, not because he expected a change, but because it felt like the right thing to do, like saying, "You still matter." The German Shepherd barely moved. He remained curled against the radiator, coat still draped around his midsection. The heater's low hiss was the only sound he seemed to tolerate. Sometimes his eyes opened in the dark, just slivers of amber beneath heavy lids, watching, not reacting, but not shutting down either. And that, to Aiden, was the difference. Because shutting down was the last stage. He'd seen it in soldiers, in refugees, in himself. That blank-eyed, dead stare of someone whose spirit had gone someplace safer. Shadow hadn't crossed that line yet. He was still here, waiting. The third day began like the others. Gray skies, frost on the window, and that same tense stillness between them. Aiden sat on the floor, his back against the couch, sipping his morning coffee with both hands wrapped around the mug for warmth. He didn't try to make eye contact. He just sat, letting his presence be felt, not forced. From where he sat, he could hear the faint whistle of the radiator, could hear Shadow's breathing, steady, shallow, a little less ragged than before. Then something changed. It was subtle, the sound of movement, just the quiet shift of weight on a blanket. Then the soft clink of ceramic. Aiden froze. Not visibly, just inside. like his entire nervous system hit pause. Very slowly, he turned his head. Shadow had lifted his head. He was staring at the water bowl. One paw slid forward, the other followed. Tentative, hesitant. His body stayed low ears, tilted back, muscles taut like an elastic band not yet snapped. But he moved. Inch by inch, breath by breath, he crept toward the bowl. Aiden didn't move, didn't speak. He barely allowed himself to breathe, just watched. Shadow reached the bowl. His nose hovered above it for a moment, flaring slightly. Then, with a motion so small it nearly broke Aiden's heart, the dog dipped his tongue into the water. Once, then again. Then drank small, measured laps like even hydration had to be earned carefully. Aiden closed his eyes for a second, his throat thick. This was it. Not a leap, not a dramatic recovery, just a sip of water. But in that fragile act was the first crack in the wall, the first ripple through the still surface, the first piece of trust being laid, brick by trembling brick. He opened his eyes. Shadow continued drinking, more confidently now, but never taking his eyes off Aiden entirely. Every few seconds, he'd glance sideways, checking, evaluating, waiting for some hidden violence to emerge. But Aiden stayed still. He sipped his coffee again and whispered, more to the room than to the dog, "That's good, buddy. You take what you need." He didn't try to praise, didn't clap or smile or say, "Good boy," like he might have with any other dog. Shadow wasn't ready for celebration. He was still surviving. And Aiden knew that space too well. When Shadow finished drinking, he stepped back, not in panic, but with caution. He returned to his corner by the radiator and lay down again, this time with his paws stretched in front of him instead of tucked beneath. A different posture. Not safety, but less fear. Aiden finished his coffee and set the mug aside. He shifted his weight, careful not to disturb the peace. It wasn't just a drink. It was the first choice Shadow had made in 3 days that didn't involve retreat. Aiden knew what that meant. He'd been there himself, in a different place, with different scars, but the language was the same. Choosing to live doesn't always look like a fight. Sometimes it just looks like a sip of water and a glance that says, "I'm still watching. I'm still here." The moment settled in his chest like warmth, not fire, not heat, just the kind of quiet warmth that says, "We're not where we were yesterday." That night, Aiden wrote a few notes in a yellowed notebook he kept on the edge of the counter. Just a habit from deployments documenting days that felt unremarkable, but mattered more than they appeared. Shadow drank today. First time since I found him. No food yet, but he looked at me during. Held the look. Still no growling. Still no trust. But something's different. I can feel it. He left the entry unfinished, closing the book with a soft thud. When he turned off the lights, he paused in the doorway before heading to the couch. Shadow was watching him, still curled up, but no longer pressed so tightly against the wall. His eyes were open, alert, but not pleading, not flinching. Aiden whispered, "Good night, Shadow." He turned away without waiting for a response. Because trust wasn't about demand, it was about showing up, again and again, until the silence stopped sounding like fear. It was a quiet morning, not just in sound, but in presence. The kind of stillness that didn't ask for movement or noise, just awareness. Aiden had learned to feel for that kind of quiet. Not all silence meant peace. Some silences echoed, some held their breath, and this one This one was watching. Shadow lay curled near the heater as usual. But something had shifted again, almost imperceptibly. His posture was looser, not relaxed, not yet, but the tension that once gripped every muscle had softened by degrees. Aiden waited until his second mug of coffee to test a boundary. He didn't crouch, didn't loom, just knelt beside his toolbox and quietly pulled out a small pair of trauma shears and a towel. He moved like he was still on a field medic call, deliberate, slow, respectful. No sudden gestures, no flash of metal, just quiet prep. He had noticed it the night before. Shadow's back leg had twitched violently in sleep, something more than a dream. Aiden had seen it in other dogs and men. That muscle memory of violence that doesn't need a trigger-only darkness. Now, in the soft light of early sun, he approached with gentleness, wrapped in steadiness. "Hey, Shadow," Aiden murmured, voice low and even. The dog's eyes opened, alert, not alarmed. That was new. "I'm just going to take a look, all right? Just a look." He didn't reach for him. Instead, he sat cross-legged a few feet away and waited. Shadow didn't move, but he didn't retreat either. That was permission, or the closest thing they had to it. Aiden slid a little closer and gently placed the towel over Shadow's front paws, not to restrain, but to offer something soft between hand and fur, a show of care. He reached out, his fingers trembling only slightly, and touched the edge of the coat still covering Shadow's midsection. The dog stiffened. "It's okay," Aiden whispered. "I just want to see. That's all." He lifted the coat slowly. What he saw underneath broke something in him. Ragged patches of fur, scars. Not old, faded ones, but recent, raw, jagged. Some looked like bite marks, like he'd been mauled. Others were circular, precise, burns. Aiden froze. He knew that shape. Cigarette. Held there, pressed, repeated. He inhaled sharply through his nose, didn't move. Rage buzzed at the base of his skull, red and electric, but he pressed it down. Not now, not here. Shadow shifted. A low sound rolled from his chest, not a bark, not even a snarl. A warning. Aiden's hand stopped mid-air. He didn't pull back, but he didn't advance either. "I see them," he whispered. "I see what they did." The growl deepened, but it wasn't vicious. It wasn't defensive. It was raw, like the pain itself had found its voice, and that voice still trembled in the dark. Aiden bowed his head slightly, not in submission, but in sorrow. "Who did this to you?" he whispered, not expecting an answer. "What kind of bastard could look at you and do that?" The growl softened to a whine. Shadow's body didn't tense further, but his eyes closed for a moment, as if trying to shut the memory away behind his own skin. Aiden reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a clean bandage wrap not to use, just to show. "This used to be my job, you know. I patched up people. Some good, some who didn't deserve it. But you deserve every stitch, every second of peace left in this world." He placed the wrap gently on the towel, not touching the dog again. Shadow opened his eyes. They met Aiden's, and for a heartbeat, just one. There was no barrier. No handler and dog, no rescuer and rescued. Just two creatures who had been hurt and didn't know how to let anyone near that pain again. But they were here, and they were trying. Later that day, Aidan sat by the window, notebook open on his lap, untouched. He hadn't written a word since the moment with Shadow, not because he didn't know what to say, but because he didn't know how to carry it. He looked over at the dog still by the heater, but watching him now, not flinching, just watching. Aidan closed the notebook and whispered into the silence, "Whatever they tried to break, they didn't finish the job." He stood up and walked to the kitchen, pulled a slice of turkey from the fridge, and laid it gently in the same place he always did, just within reach. He didn't look back as he returned to the couch. Didn't need to. Behind him, he heard movement, the soft tread of cautious paws, the sound of the past inching toward the present, hungry not just for food, but for something that had been taken long ago. Dignity. The apartment had fallen into a rhythm. Not quite routine, nothing between them, yet deserved that word, but a quiet understanding. Aidan gave Shadow space. Shadow tolerated Aidan's presence. There were small victories, a glance held for more than a second, a quiet meal consumed while Aidan sat near, back turned. But something still lingered, something missing. Aidan could feel it in the air between them. Not fear, not even trauma, but absence. The kind of silence left when identity has been stolen, not lost. That morning, Aidan stood in the center of the small living room, mug in hand, staring at the dog by the window. Shadow sat upright, alert, still but not relaxed. He wasn't at rest. He was waiting. But for what? Aidan couldn't tell. He tried something different. Setting the mug down, he stepped to the center of the room and stood straight, shoulders square, palms out. "Let's try something," he murmured. He raised 2 fingers and swept them left, then downward. An old K9 hand signal. Down. Nothing. Shadow blinked. Another signal, fingers to chest, then open palm forward. Stay. Still nothing. But then, a third one. Aidan raised his fist, held it still, the universal watch signal. An alert posture meant to center a working dog's attention. And this time, Shadow's tail moved. Barely. A single twitch. But Aidan saw it, like a ghost rising from memory. His heart skipped. He tried again. Same gesture. Slower this time. Measured. Shadow's ears tilted. Not back. Not down. Forward. Aidan exhaled. "You remember, don't you?" He dropped to one knee. Kept his voice calm. Reverent, almost. "Someone taught you all this. Someone trained you, and someone tried to rip it away." The words hung in the air like smoke that didn't dissipate. Shadow didn't move, but his gaze was steady now, less guarded, not open, but listening. Later that day, Aidan spread old training manuals across the coffee table, thick K9 field guides from his Army days, ones he hadn't opened in years. Each signal, each command, he studied them like scripture. He flipped to the chapter on behavioral reinforcement, then closed it. "This isn't about retraining," he whispered. "It's about remembering." He turned to look at the dog curled near the heater. Shadow watched him quietly. "Shadow," Aidan called. The dog didn't flinch, didn't acknowledge the name. It had never sat right with Aidan either. It wasn't the dog's. It was just a placeholder. What he had named the silence, the void, the presence in the dark. But now, after the signal, he wondered, what was his real name? What had they called him before the chains, before the scars? He sat on the floor a few feet away and spoke softly. Orion. The name from the badge still haunted him. He tried it now, just above a whisper. Orion. A breath passed. Shadow's head lifted, not fully, not alert, but aware. Orion, Aiden repeated, firmer now. Is that you? The dog shifted, just slightly, but enough for Aiden to feel a fracture in the ice, as if the name touched something deeper than command, something buried. He didn't repeat it, didn't need to, because names, when they're true, don't need to be spoken over and over. They fit. That night, Aiden wrote a single sentence in his notebook. The ghost has a name, and he remembers. He underlined it once, closed the notebook. In the dim light of the room, Shadow lay quietly, not curled tightly like before, but stretched just enough to show trust. Not full surrender, but a truce. And sometimes, that's the first miracle. The tennis ball was old, its fuzz worn down, half flattened from time and too many teeth. Aiden found it at the back of a drawer one morning, buried under a pile of tools and forgotten mementos from another life. It had belonged to Bear, his old partner's K9. The dog had died in combat. Aiden never spoke about it. But when he turned the ball over in his hand, fingers brushing its faded green coat, he thought of Bear's eyes, of what play used to mean, not as joy, but as language. He glanced toward the heater. Shadow lay still, paws tucked, eyes half closed in that hyper-alert state that wasn't quite sleep. Aiden didn't say anything. He simply walked over and set the ball gently on the floor, about a foot from Shadow's front paws, then backed away. No commands, no gestures. He just left it there. 3 days passed. The ball remained untouched. Shadow didn't even glance at it, at least not when Aiden was looking. Each morning Aiden checked. Still there, still waiting. Until one morning, something changed. He stepped out of the bedroom, coffee in hand, the ritual unchanged, but his breath caught. The ball was no longer where he'd left it. It had shifted, only slightly, rolled a few inches forward toward the center of the room. He stared at it for a long time, unmoving, not wind, not accident. It had been touched, moved deliberately. A silent message written in green felt. He didn't react, not out loud, not with praise or excitement. Just sat down in his usual chair and sipped his coffee slowly, never once looking at Shadow. But his heart was louder than it had been in weeks. The next day, the ball was back in its place, untouched. But Aiden understood. This wasn't regression. It was communication. Test. Retreat. Wait. Watch. Shadow wasn't playing. He was observing. So Aiden decided to do the same. On the 5th morning, the shift was unmistakable. The ball was gone. Not under the heater, not behind the couch. It sat at the foot of Aiden's bed. Placed, not dropped. Shadow didn't wait to see his reaction. He was curled, as always, by the window, head resting on his paws, still as winter. But Aiden didn't speak. He just knelt down, picked up the ball, and placed it again midway across the room. The ritual had begun. One night, near midnight, Aiden sat on the floor with a journal in his lap and the ball between them. He rolled it gently across the hardwood. It stopped 2 feet from Shadow. The dog stared, unmoving, but his ears lifted. Aiden didn't speak, just waited. After what felt like a century, Shadow reached out slow, uncertain, and tapped it once. Aiden exhaled, barely daring to breathe. The sound was soft, the faint thud of trust, still wrapped in fear. And that was how the game began. It wasn't fetch. Not really. It was something else. Something slower. One day Aiden would find the ball resting at his door. Another nudged beneath the table where he worked. No bark, no fanfare, just that quiet motion of offering, of saying, "I see you." And slowly, Aiden began to return it. Not with force, not even with expectation, just a roll, a look, and then nothing more. It went on like that for weeks, until one morning he rolled the ball across the floor and Shadow, for the first time, didn't just touch it. He picked it up, carried it over, dropped it at Aiden's feet, and sat down, right in front of him. Aiden didn't move, didn't reach. He just met Shadow's eyes, not commanding, not coaxing, just present. And for the first time since that night behind the shelter, he saw something flicker, not fear, not submission, but memory of what it once meant to be seen, to be chosen, to be asked, "Want to play?" The first time Aiden noticed it, it was almost by accident. He'd left Shadow's food bowl in the corner, as always, just a few feet from the heater where the dog still curled, half there, half somewhere memory hadn't let go of yet. Aiden had walked into the bathroom, shut the door softly, and sat on the edge of the tub, rubbing his temples. 10 seconds passed. Then 15. A faint sound. Scrape. Click. Soft breathing. He held his breath. Waited. Then peeked through the crack in the door. Shadow stood over the bowl, eating, not fast, not frenzied, just cautiously, quietly, like survival had a rhythm he didn't want interrupted. But the second their eyes met through that tiny opening, Shadow froze, then backed away, head down, shoulders braced. Aiden's heart cracked, not from rejection, from recognition. He knew that posture. He'd worn it once himself. The next night, Aiden tried again. This time he left the room entirely, sat on the steps outside his apartment, jacket zipped to the neck, letting the winter air bite his skin. Inside, silence. Then soft chewing, no click of teeth, no clank of bowl, just a ghost learning to trust its hunger again. Aiden didn't force it, didn't make eye contact, didn't cheer or call him good boy. He just began a new ritual. Each night he'd set down the bowl, then he'd turn around, sit on the floor with his back to Shadow, and speak quietly, calmly, as if talking to a friend who couldn't look him in the eye. He told him about his day, how a donor came by the shelter, how a cat named Muffin escaped her kennel again, how the heater in his truck made a weird noise. He kept his voice level, his words soft, not demanding attention, just offering presence. Some nights he didn't hear a thing. Other nights the food would be gone when he turned around, bowl licked clean. But it wasn't about the eating. It was about how he ate, how long it took, how close he dared come, and what changed in the silence between them. Then came the evening, everything shifted. It had been a long day, 2 emergency surrenders, a burst pipe at the rescue center, and his own rising tension that left his hands shaking. He didn't have the energy to speak. So he didn't. He simply placed the bowl down, turned away, and sat with his knees pulled in exhausted. Nothing left to narrate. No stories, no words, just breath. Minutes passed, maybe more, and then a sound. Not just the soft scrape of eating, a presence, a nearness. He turned his head slightly, not enough to make eye contact, just enough to catch the outline. Shadow, eating. Beside him, Not across the room, not behind the heater, 2 feet away. Still, quiet. Tense, but not running. Aiden didn't move, didn't breathe deep. But inside, something unfolded, like the part of him that always stayed coiled, waiting for loss, had dared to stretch. The next night he sat in the same spot, back to the wall, voice low. He told Shadow about the stars, about a dream he had of a battlefield, but this time he wasn't bleeding. He didn't know if Shadow listened, but when the bowl emptied again with Aiden still sitting there, he felt it wasn't just routine anymore. It was choice. The dog wasn't eating because the food was there. He was eating because Aiden was near, and didn't ask for anything. They never made a show of it. No petting, no praise, just small shifts, day by day. Until one morning, Aiden forgot to place the bowl down, and Shadow nudged it toward him. That was the first time Aiden laughed, soft, surprised, almost choked by it. He placed the bowl, sat down, and Shadow didn't wait. He ate. Right there, right then. Like maybe, just maybe, this place, this man, this moment wasn't dangerous anymore. It began with a nameplate, a rusted strip of steel no bigger than a soldier's dog tag tucked inside the envelope Aiden had found in Shadow's collar. K9, Orion. No ID chip, no digital registry, just a name that felt like a shadow half buried, half erased, and a question that wouldn't let go. Who forgets a hero? That night, with Shadow curled on the floor near the couch, half asleep but closer than ever, Aiden turned on his laptop. He didn't start with official channels. He already knew better. Police databases would be locked down, military ones even more so. And shelters didn't keep long-term logs on dogs they never took in. So he searched the way soldiers search when the rules stop working. He went dark. Old Reddit threads, obscure forums for retired handlers, web archives that looked like they hadn't been touched since dial-up, websites with blinking fonts, usernames like GhostK9 and Handler147. Aiden filtered by phrases. K9 missing after service. Dog removed from unit. No retirement ceremony. Confiscated by contractor. The deeper he went, the colder it got, and not from the winter wind seeping through the window. One forum post caught his eye, dated 4 years ago. Username, Bleeding Boot. The thread title, They Don't All Come Home. Inside, a paragraph. My partner disappeared after an op. HQ said reassigned. New handler says he never saw him. Later, I heard whispers. Some dogs get redirected to private contracts. No paperwork, no medals, no goodbye. Below that, silence. No replies. No upvotes. Buried like a warning in the dark. Another thread. Different forum. Encrypted access. Took him 15 minutes to bypass the login with an old veteran's credential from a service support site he still had access to. Inside, a spreadsheet. Names, dozens of them. Bruno, Falcon, Ash, Titan, Bolt, Zeta, Rex. Beside each, last known deployment, handler name, status. Many said MIA. Some just said NA. But one row made his stomach tighten. Orion, German Shepherd, handler ID redacted, status, retrieval failure. No retirement record. No transfer. No adoption. Just 3 words. Retrieval failure. Aiden stared at the screen, his hands clenched on the keyboard. He wasn't just imagining things. Shadow Orion wasn't simply a stray someone forgot. He was disappeared. He sat back in the chair, eyes flicking toward the dog. Shadow stirred in his sleep, paws twitching in a dream. Aiden didn't know what haunted him in that dream, but the scars on his side, the burns under his fur, the twitch in his ears at every distant noise, they weren't from war. They were from what came after. The next day, Aiden brought it up to Lisa. They sat at her kitchen table, laptops open, coffee growing cold between them. He laid out what he'd found. At first she listened like a friend, then like an advocate, and finally, like someone who realized a line had been crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. "These dogs," she murmured, scrolling. "They weren't lost. They were taken." Aiden nodded. "And if Shadow was one of them—" Lisa finished the sentence for him. "Then someone wanted him erased." They worked for hours. Lisa tracked down an old newsletter from a disbanded nonprofit that had once advocated for canine retirement benefits. Inside, a brief article. Growing concern around privately contracted military dogs disappearing post-deployment. No centralized adoption protocol. Lack of oversight. Several whistleblowers claim dogs are sold. Some even repurposed for underground operations. Sold. Not rehomed. Not honored. Sold. Like equipment. Like tools. Like less than lives. By midnight, Aiden's screen was filled with open tabs, half-saved PDFs, and the archived bones of truth no one ever meant to find. He leaned back, running his hand down his face. This wasn't just about Shadow anymore. This was about every dog whose last mission ended in silence, every badge never removed, every handler who never got to say goodbye, and every pair of eyes like Shadow's that had learned to fear hands, not follow them. The furnace hummed faintly in the background. Shadow shifted. Aiden turned. Their eyes met, still haunted, still guarded. But for the first time, Aiden didn't just see pain. He saw secrets, and a past that someone had tried to bury in blood, rust, and silence. He didn't say anything out loud. He just whispered to himself, but not softly. Enough for Shadow to hear. They thought no one would care. He looked at the screen again, then back to the dog. "But I do." It started with something simple. Aiden wasn't trying to start a war. He wasn't even trying to make a statement. It was just a photo, a moment. Shadow head tilted slightly, fur beginning to fill in around the ribs, the light from the kitchen window tracing the line of his muzzle. Still wary, still thin, but no longer invisible. He had posted it on a small Facebook group, Second Chances, Canine Rescues and Rehab, alongside a short caption. He didn't come with a name, so I gave him one. Meet Shadow 3 weeks off the street and slowly learning to breathe again. Healing takes time, but he's teaching me how. There were no hashtags, no tags, no GPS, just honesty, and maybe a little pride. The post went live at 9:43 p.m. By 11:15 it had 89 likes, a handful of hearts. One comment said simply, "God bless you. That dog looks like he's been through hell." By midnight, Aiden had shut the laptop and gone to bed. He had no idea that hell had just found his doorstep. At 3:07 a.m. the phone buzzed. Not the shelter line, not a robocall. A private message notification. Username, Mercer C9. Message, "That's my dog." Another ping. "You stole him." Aiden stared at the screen, heart still stuck somewhere between sleep and alarm. The room felt colder, though the heat hadn't kicked off. The next message came fast, like it had been waiting to be typed for a long time. "Where is he?" Not a question. A demand. He didn't respond, not yet. Instead, he opened the sender's profile. Public enough to be dangerous. Name, Colt Mercer. Profile picture, a man in his 40s, all bulk and bravado, standing next to a white truck. Aviators, leather gloves. The kind of smile that didn't touch the eyes. Background photo, a training yard with chain-link fencing and what looked like half-built kennels. The caption read, Mercer Tactical K9. Train hard, fight dirty. Aiden's gut turned. He clicked into the About section. Former military contractor, private security consultant, K9 specialist. Based, unlisted. Dozens of posts about obedience, aggression control, elite K9 loyalty. But then, a different tone in the comments. Whispers of dogs that vanished. Someone asking, "What happened to Atlas?" No reply. One woman had typed a year ago, "You told me he went to a farm, liar." The comment had 0 likes, but it hadn't been deleted, buried under noise, just like everything else Mercer wanted forgotten. Back in the message tab, Aiden stared at the last line. Where is he? He clicked out. Didn't reply. Instead, he shut the laptop, walked quietly to the living room. Shadow was awake, eyes open in the dark. Not startled, not aggressive, just watching. Aiden crouched beside him, careful not to invade space. "I think someone's looking for you," he whispered. Shadow's ear twitched, but he didn't move. By morning, the post had gone from 89 likes to over 700. The algorithm had picked it up, something about the caption, the eyes, the rawness of it all. More comments flooded in. "He reminds me of my Rex. How can people do this to animals? You gave him a reason to trust again. Thank you." But buried halfway down, a new comment. Not from Mercer's page, but familiar. "That's my dog. Return him. Or else." Aiden clicked the profile. It was new, bare, no photos. But the message had teeth, and for the first time in years, Aiden felt that old pressure behind the ribs. Not anxiety, readiness. The kind that comes before impact. He called Lisa, didn't bother with pleasantries. "Someone saw the post, says the dog's his, name's Mercer, private contractor ex-military." Lisa didn't miss a beat. "Delete the post?" "No," Aiden said. "He's not hiding anymore." There was a pause. Then, "Okay," she said, "but we need to be careful. If Mercer's who I think he is, he's not just bluffing." Aiden looked toward Shadow, who now sat quietly, staring out the window like he sensed the tension in the air. "I don't think he is," Aiden murmured. "And Shadow knows it." The rest of the day unfolded with a low hum of static beneath everything. Aiden checked the locks twice, closed the blinds. Shadow followed his movements with quiet precision, ears flicking at every distant car engine. When the mail carrier passed by, Shadow tensed. When a motorcycle idled at the light outside, his whole body locked. Aiden didn't pet him, didn't shush him, just stood nearby, let him know he wasn't alone. That night, Aiden sat down again at the computer. He typed a new post, unshared, unsent. They called him Orion once. Somewhere between war and wherever they dumped him, he became something else. He flinches at heavy boots but leans into whispers. He doesn't chase balls but watches doorways like they owe him something. And someone I now know by name, wants to take him back. But you don't get to break something and still call it yours. You don't get to hurt a creature, leave it to rot, and then claim it when it learns to breathe again. His name is Shadow now, and he stays. Aiden saved the draft. Didn't hit post, not yet, but the words were ready, and so was he. The scars didn't lie. Neither did Lisa. When Aidan opened the door that morning, she didn't waste time on greetings. Just walked in with a messenger bag slung over one shoulder and a laptop already booted. Shadow didn't bark, didn't move from his spot under the kitchen table. But he watched her, one paw half tucked beneath him, eyes tracking every step she took. Lisa gave a soft nod in his direction. "Hey, handsome," she murmured. No baby voice, no sudden movements, just calm acknowledgement. Then she turned to Aidan. "You were right," she said, her voice low. "Mercer's not just some wannabe alpha with a bad temper. He's something worse." She laid the evidence out like puzzle pieces. First, a forum buried deep in the dark corners of the web. Not indexed by search engines. Not easy to stumble into unless you knew exactly where to look. It was branded Canine Command Exchange. At a glance, it mimicked any other high-end working dog forum, breeding lines, equipment, tactical training techniques. But Lisa knew what to look for. The language, the euphemisms. "Drive trials?" she said, tapping the screen. "They're not talking about fetch." Aidan stared. Lisa scrolled. More terms. Submission conditioning. Pavlov deactivation drills, and this one proofing against mercy. They're dressing it up with science, but it's brutality. Then she pulled up a photo. Blurry, low light, but unmistakable. A dog in a crate, muzzle bloodied, one eye swollen shut. Not dead, not tended, just waiting. And next to it, in the metadata and IP logs Lisa had scraped from the page, was the name C. Mercer. "Private security training," Lisa said, tone flat. "That's what they hide behind. They claim they're building dogs for high-risk contracts, explosives, protection, combat zones. But there's no licensing, no oversight, no records of these dogs ever getting deployed." She clicked again. Now there were files. Screenshots of forum posts, group messages from encrypted apps, mentions of dogs too soft to fight, others proven worthy in ring sessions. Then came the roster, a partial list, first names or tags only. Some crossed out. One, she pointed out, was labeled Orion, redeployed 6/2022, later lost. Aidan blinked. That name. His chest tightened. "Orion," he said slowly, staring into the screen like the pixels might shift into answers. "They called him Orion before I named him Shadow." Lisa nodded. "They didn't lose him. They threw him away." Aidan sat back, the air suddenly thicker than it had been all morning. He looked over at Shadow, who had moved to the corner now, curled tightly into himself, not asleep, not relaxed, just present. He thought back to the night he'd found him, the rusted pipe, the chain, the badge. K9, Orion. And those eyes, still alive, still asking if the world had any scraps of mercy left. Lisa's voice pulled him back. "There's more." She opened another folder, this one with screenshots of state records, redacted vet files, incident reports from animal shelters who had years ago tried to flag Mercer's dogs. "None of it stuck," she said, "because every time someone got close, Mercer buried the trail, claimed it was part of private government contracts, threatened lawsuits, or worse, claimed the dog turned dangerous and had to be put down." She paused, then added, quieter, "Some of those dogs, they didn't even make it past training." Aidan stood. He couldn't sit still anymore. He paced the room, fists clenched, jaw working silently. "They erased them," he said, voice hoarse. "Turned soldiers into bait, into weapons, And when they broke, when they couldn't take it anymore, they tossed them aside like trash. Lisa looked at him, the flicker of something harder than grief in her eyes. No, worse than trash, because trash doesn't remember. Outside, wind howled past the thin windows. Aiden paused, staring through the glass as a leaf scraped down the sidewalk like it, too, had nowhere safe to land. "I need to do something," he said. "You already did," Lisa replied. "You saved him. But there's more like him. There always are." Silence stretched between them, not the kind that asks for comfort, the kind that builds momentum. Finally, Lisa said, "I can dig deeper. I've got a contact who used to work with Homeland Dog Transport Logistics. If Mercer really moved these animals under fake credentials, someone might have seen the logs." She looked up. "But if we do this, we go public eventually?" Aiden didn't hesitate. "He deserves more than quiet survival." He looked over at Shadow, still watching, still curled, but his eyes softer now. Less fog, more fire. "He deserves justice." Lisa nodded. "I'll start the trace." And Aiden walked to Shadow, slowly lowering himself to the floor just beside him, not touching, not talking, just being there. And after a long, long silence, Shadow uncrossed his paws and let out a breath. The knock came before sunrise. 3 short raps. Not urgent, not casual, measured. Aiden blinked awake, disoriented in the half-light. The digital clock glowed 5:03 a.m. His body still carried the exhaustion of another restless night, half sleeping, half listening for noises that might not come. But something about this sound set his nerves on edge. He slipped quietly from bed, the wooden floor cool beneath his bare feet. No cars outside, no delivery trucks, just the faint hum of the fridge and the pulse in his ears. Then another knock, this one slower, deliberate. Shadow was already at the door, not barking, just standing. Tail low, body taut, ears forward. Aiden had never seen him like this, completely still, like stone carved with warning. The knock came a third time. Aiden's fingers tightened on the doorknob as he peered through the peephole, and his breath stopped. The man standing outside looked like he'd never been cold a day in his life, though the morning air was brutal. No gloves, no visible discomfort, just presence. He was tall, broad, wearing a long coat that hung too straight, like it was weighted. His boots were scuffed but heavy. Military or tactical Aiden had worn enough to know the difference. And his face. That smile didn't touch his eyes. It was thin, rehearsed, and radiated the kind of control Aiden recognized from the worst corners of war zones and backroom deals. Colt Mercer. It had to be. Aiden opened the door only an inch, chain still on. "Can I help you?" The man tilted his head, like the question amused him. "I think you already did." His voice was smooth, coated in something that could almost pass for charm if you didn't listen too closely. "I'm just here to collect what's mine." Aiden's throat tightened. "You mean the dog?" The man didn't blink. "His name is Orion. He's property of Titan Ops. You've got a piece of gear that went missing." Aiden let the words hang, let the air chill between them. "Your gear was found half-starved, chained to a pipe behind my shelter. Funny place to misplace military assets." Colt's smile widened, then dropped, just for a flicker. "I didn't say it was clean, just said it was mine." Behind Aiden, a low sound rose. Not a bark, not a whine, but a growl so deep it didn't come from Shadow's throat. It came from his core. It rumbled like a warning, a declaration, a line in the sand. Colt heard it. His gaze flicked past the doorframe. "Well, look at that," he said, smile returning. "Still remembers me." Shadow stepped forward, now fully in view. His head low, hackles just barely raised. Not wild, not frantic, focused. Colt's hand twitched, subtle, like muscle memory. A command, but Shadow didn't obey. He growled louder and didn't break eye contact. Aiden unchained the door not to open it wider, but to make it clear. "I'm not handing him over." Colt's expression didn't change. Not at first. Then, slowly, his features hardened. Not angry, just amused at the resistance. Like someone annoyed they had to play nice a little longer. "You think you're saving him," Colt said quietly. "But you don't know what he is, what he's been through." "I know enough." "Do you?" Colt leaned in a fraction, voice colder now. "Ask yourself this. What happens when the next loud bang sends him over the edge? What happens when his programming kicks back in and you're not the one he protects?" Aiden stood his ground. "He's not a machine." Colt's eyes darkened. "He was never just a pet." The tension was a wire stretched between them, taut and waiting to snap. Shadow didn't flinch, didn't cower. He stepped between them, placing his body squarely in front of Aiden. Colt's jaw clenched. "Fine," he said at last. "Have it your way." He stepped back down the porch steps, movements precise, coat swaying with each controlled stride. At the bottom he turned. "One day you'll regret this," he said, voice low. Then he vanished into the fog. Aiden closed the door and locked every bolt, then leaned against it, heart racing. Shadow stood beside him, muscles still tight. But he didn't growl any more. He looked up once, eyes clearer than they'd ever been. And for the first time, Aiden reached down and rested a hand gently on his head. No flinch, just warmth, connection. "You protected me," Aiden murmured. Shadow said nothing, but he didn't need to. He was staying. And now the world knew it. The first thing Aiden noticed was how clean the paper was. Not wet from the dew, not crumpled or torn. Just a single white envelope, perfectly centered beneath his windshield wiper. He stood frozen beside his truck, keys clenched in one hand, Shadow's leash in the other. The morning air was still gray with pre-dawn light, the parking lot behind the shelter empty except for his vehicle and a distant trash bin rattling in the wind. He reached for the envelope slowly, like it might detonate. Inside was a single line typed in black. "You can't hide him forever." No name, no signature, no smudge of a fingerprint, just certainty. Shadow shifted beside him. He hadn't barked, hadn't even growled, but Aiden could feel it. Something in the dog had curled inward. It had been a good week, a calm one. No growling in his sleep, no flinching at footsteps. Shadow had even started lying closer on the rug at night, body relaxed, breath steady. Now, all of that unraveled. That night, the nightmares came back. It started with a noise, a door shutting somewhere in the building. Too loud, too sudden. Shadow jolted upright from sleep and bolted, not toward danger but away. He crashed into the bathroom, trembling, wedging himself behind the toilet like he was hiding from a strike. Aiden didn't chase him. He waited, He sat just outside the doorway, knees drawn up, speaking softly like a lullaby. Words that meant nothing and everything at once. "It's okay. You're not there. You're here. Just the door. Just wind. You're here." Minutes passed. Then Shadow peeked out, eyes wide, body trembling, and when he finally came forward, he didn't stop at the rug. He crawled onto Aiden's lap and collapsed. Aiden didn't move for a long time. He just held him. By the third night, the growling started again, quiet but guttural. Low warning sounds from the dark corners of the room. Aiden installed a second deadbolt, reinforced the windows, closed every blind. But fear doesn't always enter through doors. Sometimes it comes from memory. Shadow stood longer at the windows now, tail low, watching, listening, waiting for a shape he hoped wouldn't return. And Aiden? He was watching too. Only he wasn't just waiting. He was preparing. Lisa answered on the second ring, her voice still thick with sleep. "Tell me what happened," she said without small talk. Aiden explained. The note, the parking lot, Shadow's regression, the panic attacks. And his gut instinct won he trusted more than evidence. "It wasn't just a scare tactic," he said. "He's letting me know he's still close, still watching." Lisa was quiet for a long beat. Then, "I believe you. I'm coming over." She arrived with her usual resolve, wrapped in a worn coat and fingerless gloves, laptop under one arm, a pepper spray keychain on the other. Aiden briefed her in low tones while Shadow lay curled in the corner head on his paws, eyes never fully closing. Lisa scanned the room, then the windows. "This isn't about reclaiming property," she murmured. "He's playing with you. Predator style. This note, it's control. Psychological warfare." Aiden looked toward Shadow. Then he picked the wrong soldier. Lisa opened her laptop. "Good, because we're going to war." They started with security, real security. Cameras at every entrance. Motion detectors by the hallway and stairwell. Lisa even helped set up a discreet live stream feed backup footage uploaded in real time to the cloud. "If he touches your truck again, we'll have more than a note," she said. But it wasn't just about defense anymore. It was about proving something, about fighting not just for Shadow, but with him. Because this dog wasn't just recovering. He was remembering. That night, Aiden sat beside Shadow and placed the envelope on the floor between them. He didn't say anything, just waited. Shadow sniffed it once, then again. His body stiffened, breath quickened. Then, an unexpected thing happened. He pawed at the envelope. Just once. Aiden whispered, "You know who it's from, don't you?" Shadow didn't respond, but his tail twitched once, not wagging, just responding, remembering. Later, after Lisa had left and the apartment fell silent again, Aiden scribbled something on the back of the envelope, then tucked it into the drawer with his military dog tags. Words he'd heard 100 times in war, now repurposed for a different kind of mission. "He's not yours anymore." The apartment was still. The kind of stillness that settles after something has broken, but before anything new has begun. Aiden sat on the worn couch, elbows on knees, the hum of the heater whispering through the vent behind him. Outside, the sky was bruised purple, the last breath of twilight sinking behind frost-laced rooftops. He didn't speak, didn't move, didn't need to. Shadow was already watching him. For hours after Colt left, the dog hadn't come near, He had returned to his silent corner beside the doorhead, low, unmoving, like a sentinel waiting for the enemy to come back. He didn't eat, didn't drink, just listened, as if expecting the knock to come again. But it hadn't. And now, finally, Shadow stood. His steps were slow, not weak, not limping, just considered, deliberate. He crossed the room without a sound and stopped in front of Aiden's knees. Aiden didn't reach out. He had learned not to. Instead, he waited. And in that stillness, something shifted. Shadow lowered his head. Then, without ceremony or hesitation, rested it gently on Aiden's lap. Not beside him, not near him, on him. Aiden froze. Not out of fear, but out of reverence, because he knew what this meant. He'd seen dogs broken beyond repair, seen canines trained to follow orders without thought, loyalty built on reward or punishment, not choice. But this was different. No leash, no command, no treat, just presence. Shadow wasn't following instinct. He was choosing. Aiden let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding and slowly, carefully placed one hand on the back of Shadow's neck. The fur there was still uneven, patchy from scars, cold in places where burned tissue had never healed properly. But beneath it, the muscles twitched slightly. Not from tension, from recognition. "You don't owe me anything," Aiden whispered, voice rough. Shadow didn't move. "You don't have to protect me, or stay." Stillness. Then, barely perceptible, Shadow exhaled, and his body relaxed. It wasn't a moment you'd see in a movie. No swelling music, no sudden transformation. But for Aiden, for the man who'd woken up to blood on his hands in a country far from home, who knew what it meant to lose comrades to silence and steel, this was more than a scene. It was a promise. Not spoken, not signed, but sealed in the simplest gesture. One wounded being placing his trust, his entire weight on another. Aiden leaned back into the couch, hand still resting gently on the dog's shoulders. He didn't cry. He didn't smile. But he closed his eyes and let himself feel something he hadn't in years. Safe. The night stretched long but not heavy. Shadow didn't leave Aiden's side. Not when the radiator clicked on. Not when distant sirens wailed and echoed through the city's steel bones. Not when Aiden eventually drifted into sleep with his hand still resting on the ridge of Shadow's spine. For the first time, the apartment felt less like a shelter and more like a home, a quiet one, worn at the edges, but real. Sometime past midnight, the wind picked up. It moaned through the alley like a memory looking for a door left open. Shadow lifted his head, ears twitching, eyes scanning the darkened room. He saw nothing, but he stayed alert a moment longer, then lowered his head again, back onto Aiden's lap, because the world outside might still come for them. But here, in this moment, they had each other, and that was enough. The clink of keys and cold fluorescent light marked the start of another shift at Hope Trail Animal Rescue. Aiden stood alone in the intake bay, scrubbing dried stains off the floor that never really stayed clean. Outside, frost still clung to the chain-link fence like lichen. It was too early for visitors, too quiet for comfort. But the quiet didn't last. The door slammed open, not hard, but with intent. "Morning, Doc," said Valerie Reese, the center's director. Her voice was tight, her clipboard tighter. Aiden turned, wiping his hands on his cargo pants. "Val?" She didn't smile. "Got a minute?" she asked, already stepping deeper into the room. Her boots echoed like small accusations. He nodded, heartbeat tightening. Valerie didn't waste time. She rarely did. "You took in a dog last week. Off record." Her tone was flat, not a question. Aiden said nothing. Her eyes narrowed. "German Shepherd, scarred, male. No microchip, no registration. That ring a bell?" The room suddenly felt colder than outside. "I didn't process any new intake," Aiden said, carefully neutral. "That's the problem," she said, flipping the clipboard around and tapping it. "Someone saw you leave here late, with something under your coat, something that barked." He could have lied better, could have shrugged, made a joke, denied. But Valerie had known him too long, served on the same relief convoys, sat beside him when he couldn't breathe after a night shift because of a baby pit bull who didn't make it. She knew his tells, and she was waiting for him to give one. "Look," she said, lowering her voice. "If it's just a stray you're trying to rehab quietly, fine. But if it's dangerous, and I mean legally dangerous, you're putting your license and this shelter on the line." Aiden clenched his jaw. "He's not dangerous." "But he's unregistered," she countered. "And you didn't clear him through quarantine. You didn't even log his arrival." She stepped closer. "You're a medic, not a rogue rescue op. What if that dog bites someone? What if he's diseased? Do you know what would happen to this place?" He didn't answer. Didn't say yes. Didn't say I know. Didn't say I've thought about it every single night since I brought him home. "I should report it," Valerie continued, not unkindly. "Hell, I have to. You know protocol." Aiden looked down at his hands. They were shaking, not from cold, from restraint. "His name's Shadow," he finally said, barely above a whisper. "Found him tied behind the facility after shift. Near death. Burn scars. Collar tag said K9, Orion." Val's expression didn't soften, but it stilled. "Military?" "Private, maybe. Trained, but someone tried to wipe it out. He wasn't just abandoned, Val, he was destroyed. And now you've got a walking liability in your apartment." "No," Aiden said, firmer this time. "Now I've got a survivor who finally slept through the night." She exhaled through her nose, weighing the risk against the man she knew. "You know what this looks like to animal control?" she asked. "I know what it looks like to him," Aiden replied. That made her flinch. Silence stretched, the kind that held choices. Finally she said, "I didn't see anything. But this is your line, Aiden. You cross it again, drag this place into a lawsuit or worse, and I will report it. Friendship or not." He nodded. Understood. "Keep him out of sight," she added, "and pray he stays quiet." As she turned to leave, her voice softened just once. "I hope he's worth it." When the door shut behind her, Aiden leaned against the wall. The weight of the lie didn't crush him. It clarified him. Some things were worth risking everything for. Shadow hadn't chosen to be broken. But Aiden, he could choose what came next. The morning had started quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't comfort, but warns. The sidewalk was dusted with the soft crumble of early snow, the sky still gray with sleep. Aiden kept his hands in his pockets, letting Shadow walk slightly ahead, tethered by a custom leash looped around his wrist twice. Not for control, but caution. It had been months now. Small steps, soft victories. Shadow had learned not to flinch at wind gusts, not to panic at passing cars, not to mistake every alley shadow for a threat. But the war inside him hadn't ended. It had only adapted. A jogger turned the corner, young, fast, hood pulled up, shoes pounding against the concrete like rapid gunfire. To anyone else, it was routine. To Shadow, it was ambush. Before Aiden even registered the shift, Shadow was airborne. No bark, just a low, guttural growl and a lunge fueled by something old, something primal. The leash held. Barely. Aiden yanked back, feet scraping against the salted sidewalk. Shadow's front paws clawed the air, teeth bared, chest heaving. The runner let out a sharp shout, more panic than pain, and stumbled back, dropping her phone in the snow. "Jesus," she gasped. "He went for me." Aiden dragged Shadow back, wrapping both arms around his ribs. "He's not trying to hurt you. He's scared. But the words were wasted. She was already filming. By the time they got home, Aiden's knuckles were raw from the leash burn. Shadow lay curled under the kitchen table, tail tucked, not moving, not even blinking. His ears were pinned back, not in aggression but shame. Aiden sat on the floor nearby, heart still hammering. It hadn't been a bite, not even close. But it had been enough. Enough to draw fear. Enough to draw eyes. His phone buzzed 2 hours later. Unknown number. He already knew what it meant. He answered anyway. "Mr. Callahan," the voice said, clipped and practiced. "This is Officer Jennings with City Animal Control. We received a report of a potential attack involving an unregistered canine under your care." Aiden didn't speak. "Due to the nature of the incident, your employment at Hope Trail Rescue has come under review. Additionally, we are requesting a formal examination of the animal in question. By law, you are required to surrender the dog pending assessment." "No," Aiden said. It came out too fast, too hard. A beat of silence. "Excuse me?" "No, he didn't attack. He reacted. He was leashed. The runner was never touched." "Mr. Callahan, we have video footage that contradicts—" "I have a veteran service record and a trauma-certified license in animal rehab. Are you really going to condemn a dog over a flinch?" The officer's voice cooled. "This isn't about blame. It's about safety." Another silence. Then softer, almost reluctantly. "You have 24 hours to comply." He didn't hang up. He just let the call die on its own. Across the room, Shadow hadn't moved, but his eyes were open now, watching, like he knew. That night, Aiden didn't sleep. He sat on the floor beside the kitchen table, arms draped loosely around his knees. Shadow's body shook in soft, rhythmic pulses. Aiden didn't pet him, didn't speak, but he stayed. He stayed as the panic attacks came and went in the dog's breath. He stayed as the city he lived in decided through screens and headlines and protocols that Shadow was dangerous. He stayed when it would have been easier to run, because he remembered what Shadow had chosen that night weeks ago when Colt left. He chose to stay, and now it was Aiden's turn. By dawn, he made his choice, not as a medic, not as an employee, but as someone who had once needed saving and knew what it meant when no one came. He wasn't going to let that happen again. Not to Shadow. Not now. Not ever. The cursor blinked on a blank screen. Steady. Unforgiving. Like a metronome counting down to something he couldn't take back. Aiden stared at it for a long time. The coffee beside him had gone cold. Shadow was asleep beneath the windowsill, his breathing slow but uneven, haunted, even in rest. Outside, the world was waking up, oblivious to the battle in a small apartment above the rescue center that no longer wanted him. Lisa had called that morning. Her voice carried the weight of someone who'd fought too many battles with too little armor. "You can't stay quiet, Aiden." He said nothing. "I know what you're thinking, that protecting him means hiding him. But that's not protection anymore, that's disappearance. That's what they did to him." Still, he hadn't spoken. So she softened. "You love him," she said gently. "That's obvious. So show them why." Now, hours later, he sat there, fingers hovering over the keys, not knowing where to start. He could have written like a medic, case notes, symptoms, scars logged by location and severity. He could have written like an employee, timelines, incident reports, records of good behavior, but none of that would matter. Not really. Because people don't change laws or minds because of paperwork. They change because of stories. And so he began. Not like a vet, not like a rescuer, but like a man trying to explain what it means to be chosen by a soul no one else believed in. His name is Shadow. I didn't name him. He earned it. I found him on a night I wasn't supposed to be working. Someone else called out. I wasn't meant to be on that shift. But maybe fate doesn't care about rosters. He was chained to a rusted pipe in the alley behind our center, freezing, bleeding, silent, no collar, no microchip, no name. But there was a badge, metal, old, worn, Canine Orion. That was the first thing I knew about him. The second was this. He didn't bark, not once. Most dogs bark when scared, when angry, when in pain. He didn't, because someone had taught him not to, and then taught him he didn't matter. Aiden paused. His fingers trembled, but he kept typing. I broke protocol, took him home, hid him. I should have reported him. The law says dangerous dogs get evaluated and usually put down, but I saw his eyes, and they weren't dangerous. They were tired and pleading. That first night he didn't eat, didn't move, slept curled against the radiator like he wasn't sure warmth was allowed anymore. It took days for him to drink with me in the room, weeks to sit near me without flinching, months before he placed his head in my lap. That wasn't instinct. That was choice. He chose me. And now, I'm choosing him. He stopped again, swallowing hard. Across the room, Shadow shifted slightly in his sleep. A quiet huff. A paw twitch. Aiden stared at the screen. It wasn't enough. Not yet. Someone's going to say he's dangerous, that he lunged, that he growled. And he did. But let me ask you, if you were taught that sudden movement meant pain, if every sound might be a threat, if the hands that raised you also hurt you, wouldn't you react too? Trauma doesn't make a dog bad. It makes him wounded. And wounded things don't need cages. They need time. They need space. They need someone who won't give up on them. Aiden sat back. His chest felt hollow, but also lighter. He read the post one more time, his eyes stinging at the end. Then, without ceremony, he clicked post. It was done. No turning back. Outside, the city buzzed on. Inside, Shadow stirred again and padded slowly across the room. He didn't lay down right away. Just stood beside Aiden for a moment, then rested his head gently on the man's thigh. Same place he had that night after Colt left. Only this time, Aiden didn't freeze. He reached down, scratched behind one ragged ear, and whispered, "They're going to see you now." And together they waited for whatever came next. It started small, just one post. Aiden expected maybe a few quiet acknowledgments from friends. But by morning, his phone was buzzing nonstop. 97 notifications, 43 new messages, thousands of comments. The post spread fast, shared 3,400 times by 9 a.m. By noon, a rescue group reposted it. A retired military dog handler commented, "This isn't just a story. This is a pattern." Donations began trickling in. $100 from Montreal, then more and more. Aiden scrolled through comments. "Thank you for speaking up. You didn't rescue a dog. You rescued a soul." This broke me. Then it rebuilt me. For the first time, Aiden felt less alone. Until he saw it, a comment buried deep. "He's mine. I'm coming. Colt." Aiden froze. No profile pic, no history, just a new account, at CMD Unit Colt. But the words were enough. Colt had seen it. Now he was watching. Without thinking, Aiden locked the doors, windows, unplugged the router, switched his phone to airplane mode. Shadow stirred, sensing the change, and quietly took position at the door guarding. That evening, Lisa arrived unannounced. She saw the lockdown room, the look on Aiden's face, Shadow at the door. "I saw the comment," she said. "He's bluffing," she added. Aiden shook his head. "He hunts." Lisa handed over a USB. "Proof of what he's done. This isn't just about Shadow anymore." The next morning, Aiden installed cameras 1 at the door, 2 more by noon. Surveillance became his armor. He looked at Shadow and said softly, "You're not his anymore. You're not a Shadow. You're Rex." Rex blinked, lifted his head as if accepting it. Lisa returned with coffee, a laptop, and a name. Delaney Cruz, investigative reporter. Delaney appeared on screen, sharp-eyed, confident. She'd been tracking illegal canine rings. Colt wasn't just a trainer. He was part of a network. Aiden's post had pierced their silence. "We build the case, piece by piece," Delaney said. Lisa brought legal help, too. Kara Wu, an animal protection lawyer. She drafted a petition to get Rex legal protection, not just as property, but as a sentient victim. That night, Aiden watched live camera feeds, tension sharp. Rex lay near the door, no leash, no command, just choice. The apartment became a war room. Walls lined with names, photos, dates, evidence. Each file told the same dark story. Dogs hurt, silenced, vanished. Then came the breakthrough. Colt's name tied to a shell company, Arc Sentinel Tactical Solutions. Over $900,000 in canine acquisition fees, linked to a decommissioned shipping yard, a place where dogs go to disappear. Rex stirred at the name, eyes sharp. Aiden met his gaze. "You weren't meant to be a story, but now you are. And maybe that's what saves the next one." Kara arrived that night, ready for battle. "If we do this, we do it loud testimony, evidence, media, everything. Photos of Rex's scars, vet reports, testimonies. They built their case. Whistleblowers came forward. Shadow Rex was no longer just a survivor. He was proof that cruelty leaves marks. One night, as Rex slept peacefully, Aiden whispered, "You were loyal, then discarded. You were silent. Now you'll be heard." And for the first time, Rex didn't growl in his sleep. Lisa's place smelled of eucalyptus and old books, with sunlight trapped in curtain folds and too many mugs for one person. Tonight, it felt like a bunker, a safe house. Aiden stood in the doorway, leash still in hand, though Shadow Rex no longer needed it. The dog stood still, alert, taking in the new territory. Lisa crouched low. "Hey, big guy. This isn't forever. Just somewhere the bad guys can't find you." Shadow's ears flicked, but he stayed close to Aiden, who hesitated before unclipping the leash. Every goodbye had always felt permanent. But this wasn't war. This was protection. Shadow inspected the space Lisa had prepared. Old rug, bowls, tennis ball, then lay near the door, guarding, watching. "I'll stay tonight," Aiden said. Lisa nodded, offering tea or whiskey. Night crept in, cold and quiet. Aiden lay awake on the couch, listening. Not for danger, but for Shadow's steps. But the dog stayed at the door, waiting. Past 2 a.m., sleep came jagged. In dreams, barking, mud, chains, fire, blood. Aiden bolted upright, heart pounding. Shadow stood nearby, watching not the room, but him. "It's just a dream, buddy. Mine this time." Shadow didn't move, didn't leave. He stayed until Aiden's breathing calmed. By morning, Lisa found them like that. Aiden exhausted, Shadow guarding. Before dawn, a convoy of vans and cruisers moved through the city's outskirts, silent, focused. Colt Mercer's compound looked like a mechanic's shop, but was really a graveyard. Inside, the smell hit them: urine, rot, and something worse. Kennels stacked, dogs silent, trained not to bark. The basement was a horror, cages lashed with rope, dogs broken in body and spirit, a pit ringed by chairs and syringes, a whiteboard, performance pain. They moved fast, sedating dogs, collecting evidence. Colt didn't resist arrest. He opened the door as if expecting them, smirking. Behind the tape, Aiden held Shadow. The dog didn't growl at Colt. He simply watched, then turned away. Lisa approached. "They found the files. It's all there." "I don't want revenge," Aiden said. "I just want it to end." "It has," Lisa replied, "because someone still believed in him." Shadow sat, still guarding, but no longer afraid. Later, Aiden walked through the cleared compound. Paw prints marked the ground, some toward freedom, others circling, as if the dogs never believed they could leave. Inside, the stench of fear clung to every surface. He stopped at an empty crate, its bars etched with claw marks. No attempt to escape, just proof of existence. In the basement, the pit remained, washed clean but haunted. He found fur caught in a cage's bars, a snapped collar, an overturned bowl, no name. But she mattered. Aiden left a strip of Shadow's old leash at the cage. You weren't just bodies. You were survivors. Outside, Lisa stood by the transport truck. Shadow waited in the car, nose pressed to the window, choosing to trust. Aiden climbed in. "We're not done. Not until the last one gets out." Shadow rested his chin on Aiden's knee, knowing this fight belonged to all of them now. There are two kinds of silence. The first is what Aiden used to know: heavy, brittle, like breath held too long in a chest too tight. The second, this one, soft, alive, the kind that settles into corners like peace rather than fear. Shadow stepped through the apartment door, no leash, no hesitation. The same doorway where he'd once entered wrapped in a wool coat, shivering, skeletal, barely breathing. Now his paws landed steady on the hardwood, his body filled out beneath healed fur. The patch over his left rib still held a ghost of scar, but not shame. Aiden didn't speak. He just stepped aside, letting Shadow decide what this place would mean now. The dog made a slow loop around the room. Once, he would have bolted to the radiator, his chosen refuge, a place that whispered heat but never safety. Now, he passed it without pause. He sniffed the couch, the rug, the corner where his water bowl had always been. But it wasn't just exploration, it was claiming. With every measured breath, every tail flick, Shadow was taking something back. Not space, not objects, but belonging. When he reached the low bookshelf by the window, he stopped. Aiden had moved something there while he was gone, a small photo frame. Inside, a printed shot of Shadow, lying on his side in the sun. Next to it, a folded piece of the badge collar that once marked him K9 Orion, scorched at the edge, preserved by intention. Shadow's nose touched the glass once. Then he lay down beside it, slow and deliberate, like anchoring a flag. Aiden exhaled. Not a sigh, not fatigue, but release. He crossed the room and sank to the floor, a respectful few feet away. "You're home," he said quietly. Shadow didn't look up, but neither did he move away. A moment passed, then two. Aiden reached forward, careful, slow, and extended a hand toward the scarred patch behind Shadow's shoulders, a place that once triggered flinches. Growls. Trauma responses burned deep into nerves. But now, there was no growl, no tensing, just stillness. And then, subtly, like a thread shifting beneath weight, Shadow leaned into it. Not out of obedience, not submission, but choice. Outside, the city moved. Cars honked. Someone shouted down the block. A baby cried in the apartment upstairs. But inside, the world had shrunk. It was just a man and a dog, both broken once, now unbroken, together. Aiden didn't realize he was crying until he felt the wetness on his wrist, just below where Shadow had rested his head. Not sobs, just warmth. The kind that only comes when something once fractured fits again. Later that night, after Shadow ate in full view of Aiden for the first time, he curled up by the window. Moonlight fell across his body like a blanket. Aiden sat nearby, laptop open, documents sprawled. The case wasn't over. The public hearings would begin next week. Lisa was preparing testimonies, the lawyers finalizing witness lists. But tonight, Aiden wasn't the rescuer, or the advocate, or the whistleblower. He was just someone who'd been chosen. Someone Shadow had let in. He reached toward his desk drawer, pulled something out. A new collar. Simple. Black. No badge this time. Just one word engraved on the tag. Shadow. He walked over, crouched low. "May I?" he whispered. Shadow opened one eye, then stood and lowered his head. Aiden clipped the collar into place. It made no sound, but it spoke louder than any command ever had. The building wasn't much to look at. Peeling paint clung to its wooden frame like forgotten history. The chain-link fence was bent in places, and weeds grew wild in the cracks of the lot. But to Aiden, it was perfect. Because sometimes broken places are the best places to begin again. They called it Sanctuary 1. A name Lisa came up with one evening, hunched over takeout containers and stacks of grant paperwork. It sounds like a military base, Aiden had joked. It is, Lisa replied, for survivors. The money came from donations, thousands of small voices echoing one loud belief. Dogs like Shadow deserve more than a cage or a bullet. There were no sleek corporate sponsors, no glossy ads, just people who had read Shadow's story, seen the scars, and whispered, "Me too." Aiden unlocked the door for the first time with Shadow at his side. The hallway smelled of old wood and forgotten winters. Dust motes drifted in golden beams from broken windows. The space held echoes of what it had been and what it could become. Shadow sniffed the air, ears flicking toward each sound. This was no apartment, no hiding place. This was his purpose now. They cleaned for days, tore up carpet, replaced broken locks, painted over stains that didn't need explanations. Lisa built the intake files. Aiden installed custom kennels, not cages, never cages, with soft mats and gentle lighting. He refused to buy those stainless steel bowls. Too clinical, too cold. He found hand-thrown ceramic ones instead, each slightly different, like the dogs that would use them. By the second week, the first arrival came. A brown pit bull with cloudy eyes and a medical file thicker than a phone book. They named her Maggie. She'd been used for breeding. Dumped at a shelter when her body could no longer perform. She flinched when touched, until Shadow walked in. He didn't bark, didn't sniff or circle. He just sat, still, present, a mirror in fur. And after 10 minutes, Maggie sat too. Word spread. A retired officer in Utah sent 3 dogs, each with worn teeth and military tattoos. An old woman in Montana mailed a letter. "I can't adopt, but I knitted 4 blankets. They're soft, like he deserves." Volunteers trickled in. A carpenter offered to build an outdoor run. A child donated his allowance, 3 crumpled dollars taped to a drawing of a German shepherd with wings. No slogans, no campaigns, just quiet, steady belief. Aiden sat on the porch one evening, legs stretched, coffee in hand. Shadow lay beside him, head resting on his front paws, watching the horizon. The yard was full now. 8 dogs of various shapes and histories. Some limped, some had one eye, some barked in their sleep. But none were unwanted. Not here. Lisa walked up behind him, tapping a folder against her palm. "We got our nonprofit registration," she said. "Sanctuary 1 is official." Aiden chuckled softly. "We should celebrate." "I bought a cake," she said. "It's shaped like a bone." Of course it was. As dusk fell, Shadow stood. And for the first time since arriving, he walked over to the new dogs, each one pausing to notice him. He didn't command. He didn't lead. He welcomed. With presence. With eyes that had seen the worst and still stayed soft. Shadow didn't just survive the system that tried to break him. He became the symbol of what it meant to rewrite it. A plaque would go up the next week, mounted at the front gate, carved into it in simple block letters, "For the dogs no one wanted, and the ones who stayed anyway." And just beneath that, smaller, Ambassador, Shadow. It was raining. Not the kind of cinematic storm that drums meaning into silence, but a soft, whispering drizzle. Enough to make the reporters adjust their microphones and interns hold plastic folders over expensive cameras. Sanctuary 1's first public press event was modest on purpose. A tent borrowed from a nearby firehouse, a podium made from salvaged barnwood, no sponsor banners, no flashy handlers, just folding chairs and dogs. Aiden stood just off to the side, smoothing the sleeves of his only clean shirt. Shadow sat beside him. No leash, no vest, just presence. The small crowd quieted when Lisa stepped up to the mic. She spoke briefly about healing, about dogs discarded and reclaimed, about the thin line between fear and love. Then she introduced the man who made it possible. "Aiden Shaw," she said simply, "and Shadow." Aiden walked to the podium, hands slightly trembling. Not from nerves, from weight. He cleared his throat. "I didn't plan to say anything big," he started, "because Shadow taught me that the loudest bonds don't always speak." Laughter rippled, gentle, understanding. He looked down. Shadow met his eyes, that familiar amber stillness, like an old tree watching the wind. Aiden continued, voice steadier. "I found him chained to steel, starving, shaking. They said I should report him. That protocol demanded I isolate him, maybe even put him down." A pause. "I broke that protocol." A few heads in the audience nodded. He let the silence settle. "Because sometimes, when you look into the eyes of something broken, you see a reflection. And what you do next tells you who you are." Applause rose, but Aiden barely heard it. Because she stepped forward just then, small, older, wrapped in a red shawl soaked at the edges. In her hands, a photo. She held it out to him like an offering. A gesture both reverent and trembling. Aiden took it and froze. It was Shadow, but not the version standing beside him now. The image showed ribs like prison bars, dull eyes, blood at the corner of a split lip, fur torn in places where no accident could explain. A moment captured in the deepest dark. And yet, taped to the corner of the photo was a single word, scribbled in a shaky hand: hope. "I was in the hospital," the woman said softly. "Chemo. No visitors allowed because of infection risk. I saw your post on my niece's phone." She held it up to the window. "I stared at this dog, your dog, and I said to myself, if he can survive that, I can survive this." Her voice cracked. "This gave me hope." She didn't need to say more. Aiden swallowed hard. He looked at Shadow. The dog didn't wag, didn't bark, just leaned ever so slightly against Aiden's leg, and Aiden man, a few words, survivor of quiet wars, found his voice. "He gave me purpose." The microphone didn't amplify it much, but it didn't have to. Because some words don't need volume. They carry weight. After the event, people stayed. Not to take photos, not for sound bites, but to kneel beside the dogs, to press foreheads to fur, to whisper things no one else would hear. One little boy sat next to Shadow, clutching a plush German shepherd with one eye missing. "They said he was too broken," the boy mumbled. Aiden crouched beside him. "Who did?" "The other kids. Said I was dumb to bring him to show and tell." Aiden smiled. "Well, Shadow would have brought him." The boy looked up. "Really?" Aiden nodded. "Shadow's team doesn't care how you start, only that you stay." Later that night, back inside the sanctuary, Aiden framed the photo. He didn't hide it. He hung it above the door. So every time he walked out to greet the world, he would remember where Shadow came from, and why Sanctuary 1 existed at all. There was no announcement, no paperwork, no final signature stamped by the city. Just the quiet, unshakable certainty that some things are meant to stay. Shadow wasn't up for adoption anymore. Not because no one asked. They did. Emails came daily, some kind, some desperate, all sincere. Families from out of state offering fenced yards and warm beds, veterans who said they understood trauma, a retired officer who lost his own K9 and thought Shadow might like Florida sun. Aiden read them all, every word. He even printed a few out, stacking them carefully in a drawer next to the old leash Shadow had never worn. But each time someone reached out, each time someone asked, "Is he available?" Aiden's chest clenched in a way he couldn't fully explain. It wasn't possessiveness. It was recognition. This was never about charity, not rescue, not duty. This was a reunion. It was a quiet Sunday when he said it aloud. Shadow lay near the couch, tail thumping faintly against the floor with every exhale. The window was cracked, letting in the scent of wet leaves and chimney smoke. Autumn pressing itself gently into the apartment. Aiden sat across from him, coffee forgotten, gaze steady. "You're not going anywhere," he said. Shadow didn't move, but his eyes opened, just a sliver, and stayed on Aiden's face. It wasn't dramatic, no music, no wagging tail fanfare, just the kind of silence that settles between people who've stopped pretending they need words. The sanctuary still called. Dogs still needed homes. Lisa still sent texts at 2 a.m. about urgent rescues and bad leads turning good. But here, in this space that had once smelled of mold and isolation, there was now warmth, a heartbeat shared. Aiden began hanging photos. One of Shadow, the first weak skin draped over ribs like a forgotten coat. Another taken last week. Shadow asleep on a blanket, paws twitching mid-dream, belly exposed in a rare moment of absolute safety. Side by side, the contrast felt biblical. He thought about what it meant to belong, how it was different from being owned. Colt had owned dogs. The shelter had labeled them. But only time, only presence, could forge belonging. And Shadow? Shadow belonged here, not because of pity, but because Aiden knew what it felt like to be discarded and told you were dangerous. Because they had the same wounds, mirrored differently burns under fur, shame behind ribs, the long echo of commands shouted by people who never really cared. Because some rescues rescue you back. There was a knock at the door that evening. Just a delivery dog, food in bulk, a toy that squeaked like a bird, a box labeled memory foam orthopedic bed, XL. Aiden laughed. "Guess you're officially an old man now." Shadow blinked slowly, then rose. Not like the alert trained dog from some tactical manual, not with speed, but with trust. He stood, walked over, pressed his head softly against Aiden's thigh. Not a demand, a statement, a home. Later that night, as the rain started tapping at the windows again, Aiden sat at the kitchen table, fingers hovering over the keyboard. He typed a sentence, then deleted it, then typed it again. Shadow is not up for adoption. He never was. He was just waiting for me to realize it. He clicked post. The photo he attached wasn't a perfect shot, just a candid moment. Shadow curled on the living room rug, one ear flopped awkwardly sideways, tongue peeking just a little. The caption beneath read, "Found. One soul. Return to sender." By morning, thousands had liked it. Dozens shared it with tags like #foreverhome and #notjustadog. But Aiden didn't read the comments. He was too busy sitting on the floor beside Shadow, gently brushing the last of the old scabs from behind his ears, whispering things no one else needed to hear. "You're safe now." You're mine. And thank you. The new dog didn't have a name yet. He was barely more than a skeleton, wrapped in patchy, brindle fur ears too big for his head, tail tucked so tightly between his legs it disappeared. He didn't bark, didn't whine. He just shook in the farthest corner of the sanctuary's intake room, eyes darting from every shadow as if expecting them to hit. Lisa had driven 6 hours to pull him from a kill shelter where he'd been labeled aggressive. But there was no fight left in the little body now, only tremors. Sanctuary 1 had seen worse. But somehow this one still hurt. Aiden stood by the doorway, arms crossed, watching from a distance. The pup hadn't touched food, wouldn't meet anyone's eyes, growled once when approached low and broken, more warning than threat. He remembered that sound. He remembered himself. And then he felt it, a presence at his side. Shadow. No command was given, none needed. The older dog walked forward on silent paws, no urgency, no force, just presence. He paused halfway across the room, head tilted, then turned back toward Aiden briefly as if asking, "Can I?" Aiden gave a single nod. Shadow continued. The rescue pup tensed, coiling into himself like muscle wrapped around fear. But Shadow didn't go all the way. He stopped just a few feet short and lay down sphinx-like, quiet, calm. Then, from his mouth, he released a scuffed yellow ball. It rolled forward with a soft bump, coming to rest between them. And he waited. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The pup didn't move, but the shaking eased slightly. Shadow didn't leave, didn't nudge, didn't demand. He just watched, eyes soft, body still. By the time lunch rolled around, the ball was gone. So was the distance. The two dogs lay side by side, still not touching, but breathing the same air, grounded by the same silence. Aiden crouched nearby, not wanting to interrupt the moment. He whispered mostly to himself, "He's doing what we couldn't." Lisa stepped up behind him. "He's doing what someone once did for him." That night, the new pup ate his first meal. Not in the corner, not alone. Shadow sat a few feet away facing the door, ears relaxed, like a sentinel who had chosen his post. No medals, no orders, just instinct and heart. It happened again days later with a blind dog from a hoarding case, and again with a retired military K9 who wouldn't let anyone near. Shadow never pushed. He offered presence like a balm, a quiet invitation. Stay if you want. Heal if you can. I'll be here. Soon the staff began calling him something new, not just Shadow, but the Guardian. No one taught him. No one trained him. He just knew. Because healing once received wants to be passed on. Because scars recognize scars. And because sometimes the ones who were once most broken become the fiercest protectors of those still finding their way. One evening, as Aiden closed the back gate and turned off the porch lights, he paused. Through the quiet, he saw them, the 3 dogs curled beneath the trees, one ball between them, and Shadow, sitting a little farther off, watching the stars, with eyes that had seen too much, and chosen peace anyway. The porch had always faced west, not because Aiden planned it that way, but because sometimes healing chooses its own direction. The horizon burned gold, streaked with late summer orange, and the deep purple that warned night was near. Crickets sang low. Wind nudged the leaves like breath over old skin. And 2 figures sat in the silence. One man, one dog. Shadow's muzzle had grown gray. Not in patches, but gently, like twilight touching snow. His body no longer flinched at movement. His tail didn't wag with wild joy, but swayed like a steady rhythm measured, certain. He no longer patrolled with the urgency of survival. He watched. And that was enough. Aiden leaned back against the porch post, arms resting loosely on his knees. He didn't speak at first, didn't need to. Some conversations don't need noise, only presence, only time, only the knowledge that this moment was one of the last. "You weren't broken," he finally said, voice low. "You were just waiting." His words cracked at the edges, not from sorrow but reverence. Shadow turned his head slowly. He didn't bark, didn't lick. He simply placed his chin on Aiden's leg, like he had that very first night when the nightmares stopped and trust stepped in. A wait, a gesture, a goodbye that didn't need to be spoken. Aiden reached down, resting a calloused hand between the ears that once never flinched. "You found your way home," he whispered. Shadow didn't move. Only his breathing deepened, long, soft exhales that felt like the body remembering peace. Behind them, Sanctuary 1 pulsed with quiet, life-young dogs, learning the language of safety, volunteers preparing for evening rounds, Lisa laughing in the distance. But here on the edge of all that noise and movement, the world stood still. The sun dipped lower. A final band of light stretched across the porch, warming Shadow's fur. Aiden felt it too, a quiet grace, like the kind that visits only once and never asks for more than attention. He stayed there long after the breathing evened out, long after the head grew heavy, long after he realized Shadow had fallen asleep, not the restless kind, the other kind. The kind where nothing is held back anymore. The kind you only allow when you know you're safe. Aiden didn't cry. Not then. He just rested his hand on that familiar head, eyes closed, matching his breath to the dog's. And for the first time in years, he felt still, whole. As dusk swallowed the last of the light, a breeze moved through the trees, soft and knowing, a final goodbye disguised as wind, in memory of the ones who waited and the ones who didn't. This story is more than just about a dog. It's about redemption, trust, and the quiet power of second chances. Shadow, once discarded and silenced, became a symbol for every soul, human or animal, who has ever been written off as too damaged to be saved. Through patience, compassion, and the refusal to turn away, he found not just safety, but purpose. And Aiden, a man quietly carrying his own scars, rediscovered his own worth through the loyalty of a dog who asked for nothing but a chance to stay. German shepherds like Shadow are not just protectors, they're mirrors. They reflect our pain, our resilience, and our capacity to love without conditions. Their intelligence and loyalty make them heroes, but it's their ability to heal us simply by staying near that makes them irreplaceable. May this story remind us that no one human or animal is ever too broken for hope, and that sometimes all it takes to change a life is to kneel down, look into a pair of scared eyes and say, "You're safe now," because the world doesn't change in big gestures. It changes in moments like these, one rescue at a time.